Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joined us for this BIC's Building a Better Business webinar. I just want to check that you can all hear me. So, Elena Marie, can you tell me if you can hear me?
Unmuted.
I can indeed.
Thank you. My name is Karina Urquhart. I'm the Executive Director of BIC, or Book Industry Communication. I'll be your host for this session. And for those of you who are new to BIC, BIC is a UK-based membership organisation at the heart of the book industry, creating standards, best practices and resources that form part of the DNA of your supply chains, helping organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful and ultimately, hopefully, greener. I have to say I'm absolutely delighted that we're all able to still go ahead with this event. As you know, it was originally intended as a seminar session at London Book Fair, and like many others, a lot of hard work had already gone into getting that event ready for London. And so as soon as we heard the news that the fair was cancelled due to concerns over the coronavirus, we put everything else on hold and speedily set about converting it into a webinar pretty much overnight. I think it nearly killed us. Anyway, we got there. With this in mind then, I'm extremely pleased that so many of you are supporting this event by turning up today. I believe we have 121 people registered from 12 countries and 66 organisations. That's fantastic. And apologies for those of you who are in time zones that mean you have either had to get up incredibly early or stay up incredibly late. The sponsors for this event today are Hewlett-Packard and Nielsen Book. I'd like to thank them both for helping us put on this event and for sticking with us while we changed the format so that we could still bring this event to you all today. You can find out more about Hewlett-Packard and Nielsen on our website, and there'll be a link coming up in a minute as well. So in today's webinar, we'll go on a journey through the environmental life cycle of a book, from creation to consumer, and explore what an increasingly global book trade and always improving discoverability and tradability, which are all good for business, mean for our environment.
You are unmuted. So I just feel like you should be hearing something, shouldn't you?
Do we know what the size of our industry's carbon footprint is and its consumption of plastic? How can organisations increase their sustainability whilst reducing their overall environmental impact? And what does the future hold? Our expert speakers will help us find out. But before I get started, I've got a few slides, a few housekeeping points just to mention. So we kindly ask that all non-speaking or non-speaker attendees mute themselves. This is to reduce any background noise. The organisers will be keeping an eye on that and muting you all from time to time, but please, if you can, make sure that you stay on mute unless you are a speaker. Questions for the speaker will be invited at the end of each session, time permitting. Can I ask, so that we don't have 120 people all talking at once, could you please indicate this by messaging me, Karina, or Elena Marie in the chat box, and we will invite you to then ask your question, but do remember to unmute yourself when you do that. And just to say, the session has been recorded for us to use in our marketing and for people that aren't able to attend today to enjoy later on. Unless you speak or unless you ask a question, you won't be identified in the recording. You are able to chat to other speakers, but please be aware that your name will be seen by the other attendees. So if you don't want your name to be seen, avoid the chat area. The chat won't be recorded, by the way. And just a reminder that we're on social media tweeting this event using the hashtag below on the slide there. So feel free to join in and help us share this event online. So a quick run through the program. It's online. on our website anyway, but just a very quick whiz through. So it's in 3 parts. So the first part is setting the scene. I won't read it. You can see it there on the slide for yourself. That takes about 25 minutes. Then section 2 is about the environmental health of the book industry, looking at making the books all the way through to distributing, selling, and dare I say it, returning the books. And then section 3, we're looking at the future. So that will be a panel discussion with Meryl, Brian and Victoria. And then Nick Poole will wrap up at the end with some observations and a call to action. So more information here if you want to find out more about the speakers. That's all found on our website. If you want to see a more comprehensive programme, that's there as well. If you're new to BIC, find out more about us on our own website there. And if you want to stay informed of the green events or green news, please do join our green mailing list. The link is there and it's list 4. And as before, we're on all social media platforms. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jo Shaw. Jo is a Sales Director, Book Discovery and Commerce Solutions at Nielsen Book, and she will be setting the scene for us with a presentation on the environmental health of the planet. So I will now hand over to Jo.
Thank you, Karina, and good morning. Today I'm going to begin by setting a broad backdrop for our discussions to summarise the key environmental challenges we are facing as a population and how these are being tackled. Next. I'm going to look at 3 areas. So firstly, an overview of the ways in which global governments and the public are addressing this problem head on. Secondly, key business trends, ways in which businesses are already responding to this issue. And thirdly, using Nielsen data gathered on consumer behaviour, I will delve deeper into consumer trends around sustainability and what this means for our businesses. Next. To give a global context, there's no denying the scientific evidence that our planet is warming and the huge number of challenges impacting nature and the human race. In 2020 alone, we have experienced Australian bushfires, floods in the UK, and whole communities that have been displaced as a result of natural disasters. The UN has been centre stage in strengthening the global response to the threat of climate change. And countries adopted the Paris Agreement, which many of you will be familiar with, which went into force in November 2016. In the agreement, all countries agreed to work to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees centigrade. To do this, 17 sustainability goals are measured globally and span everything from reducing world poverty, calling for climate change action, and also setting ambitious aims for industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Next. Sustainability is such a broad and all-encompassing term, and it's often difficult to know just where to start. But plastics is one arm of the sustainability conversation that has had a lot of coverage and is a major topic for discussion. Next. I think that this is a staggering statistic. Overall plastic production skyrocketed in recent decades, and as of 2015, we produce more plastic products each year than our combined weight. Next, please. Plastic is so versatile, cheap, and easy to make that it entered virtually every aspect of our lives. But with this rate of plastic production said to quadruple by 2050, our recycling system really needs to change, and fast, to halt the impact on global warming and climate change. This increasing plastic production creates tremendous stress on our planet, and the public are demanding action, and with good reason. It is estimated that in just 30 years there will be more plastic than fish in our oceans, and the biggest FMCG companies are constantly putting the spotlight over this, as their brands are often found polluting the beaches. In response to this, governments across the world are passing all sorts of targets and measures to limit plastic production and waste, introducing taxes on virgin plastic, or planning to adopt more wide-reaching deposit return schemes. One that we may all be familiar with already in Europe is the directive that came in force very recently to ban a range of single-use plastic, such as drinking straws and coffee stirrers, which has already been implemented. However, we really need to reuse much more. Only 45% of plastic packaging is recycled in the UK. The amount we recycle plastic packaging is just not enough, and we have to change our behaviour and create more efficient recycling systems. And if we look away from only plastic packaging, we can see that only a fraction, 9% of total plastic production is being recycled or incinerated worldwide, which is rather disheartening. Our consumer loyalty survey results suggest that for many consumers, to be sustainable today, you just have to tick a lot more boxes. Having a recyclable pack associated with a brand or supplier is just not enough anymore. Consumers expect to see a brand that is actively engaged with the recyclable, reusable packaging and with environmental initiatives. Communities are also mobilising in a public response to address the environmental issues, such as this app, which tells you where to go and find free water on the go to refill your bottles. However, it is a sobering thought that despite these initiatives, particularly for our industry, that as a rise in online sale poses a new threat to recycling, UK officials have admitted that they will miss their recycling target by as much as a decade due to the extensive packaging used in online retail. And with a staggering projected growth of 50% of online sales looming in the next decade, this presents a real environmental concern. And then, of course, there's just the small matter of how all the parcels get there and how we go about conducting business in our increasingly global industry. So the carbon footprint of how we deliver goods and services is also under the spotlight. It's widely reported, and people are familiar with the fact that aviation contributes to about 2% of the world's global carbon emissions, according to the International Air Transport Association, who predict that passenger numbers will double to 8.2 billion in 2037. And, dishearteningly, a 2017 report identified that not a single country in the world, developed or developing, has achieved truly sustainable mobility. However, there is some hope. Whilst China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases in real terms, road transport-related emissions are relatively low in per capita terms for China, and air pollution is on the decrease in some cities. Why? Well, China has adopted stringent fuel efficiency, quality and emission standards based on EU guidelines and referred to as the China 6 standards. They come into force this year and will cover light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. China already heavily promotes the use of electric cars, hybrid and electric buses on a massive scale, and e-bikes. In addition, the government have offered subsidised grants of up to 80% of the construction costs to build shore-based electric power supply equipment, which has covered 26 port berths in Shanghai port to promote clean shipping. Next, please. So now, having set the scene in global terms, let's take a look at what businesses are doing to be proactive. Do they really walk the walk? Even with many large companies all over the world signing up to end the plastic pollution, production is set to increase, especially since major Saudi oil producers are shifting their focus from reliance on fossil fuels now to plastic production. Next, please. This is one of the reasons why the New Plastic Economy project has been launched, aiming to fundamentally change the system that we have today. Next. And And it is very encouraging to see that the Ellen MacArthur's Foundation project got major support by FMCG companies supporting the new plastic economy initiative. And it's worth remembering that just several years ago, the situation was quite different. Companies are now prepared to share their environmental, social and governance information. And as many of you will be aware, some such as Microsoft have gone a step further and announced in January that they will be carbon negative by 2030. And by 2050, Microsoft will remove from the environment all the carbon the company has emitted either directly or by electrical consumption since it was founded in 1975. Coca-Cola is also proactive in this space. Their aim is to have 100% of packaging recyclable by 2025, and they are increasing the amount of recycled materials used in the production of their products. And I absolutely love this idea of a reverse vending machine trialled in the UK theme parks over the last 2 summers, where customers were given a reward in return for recycling. Next, please. Many of the biggest retailers pledged to change or trial many new initiatives, but critics in this space often say it is not fast enough. There are some fantastic other innovations though. Some of you may be familiar with Loop, an innovative solution which is trialled in Canada and the UK and aims to bring consumer stores packaging which is reusable in the form of a reusable tote to replace delivery boxes and all that cardboard. And the really good news for business is that companies embracing this have delivered on their return of investment in sustainability. Unilever has seen their sustainable living brands deliver 70% of their growth in turnover. So now I'm going to go to the third part of my presentation, which is going to look at key consumer trends. We've taken a look at what big businesses are doing, and I'd like to move to the final focus area to look at how important these measures are in resonating with the consumer. So gearing up for the future consumer. Is this important? Absolutely. It's vital to resonate with younger consumers, especially millennials, who are very strong advocates of eco-friendly programs. However, just as we saw with large companies, it's not a clear-cut picture. Whilst consumers are clued in to the environmental message, despite their good intentions, do they walk the walk? Many need a nudge. In practice, the so-called sustainable shopper may not be so perfect either. Although majority,
I'm muted by the organiser.
Maybe they shouldn't be down. Maybe this is.
although majority of global respondents who recycle, they're an alarm.
Sorry, Joe. Could you start again? You need to unmute yourself. We were interrupted there. Sorry.
Would you like me to start from this slide? Just as we saw with large companies, it's not a clear-cut picture. Whilst consumers are clued in to the environmental message, despite their good intentions, do they really walk the walk? In practice, the so-called sustainable shopper may not be so perfect either. Although the majority of global respondents do recycle, there are an alarming 41% who are not consistent, citing too much effort and complicated system as some of the reasons why they are not engaged more. Next, please. And next. Thank you. It's worth noting that the grocery market has long been an advocate of value for money. And whilst this continues to be important, another recent driver that we can see in the retail landscape is the environmental impact of a product is also a key influencer in buying habits. Grocery market insights are useful to understand when building an approach with, as a supplier, brand, new product, or in partnership surrounding sustainability. Each factor plays heavily into a consumer's mindset. Consumers are interested in purchasing products that simultaneously help themselves and help the environment. Healthy for me, healthy for the world. So, can we use this model to understand what is next? Sooner or later, whether through government regulation, sheer force of nature, or public outcry, companies will need to respond. No matter what market or industry you play in, connecting sustainability factors to how it impacts consumers is the key. Plastic is one element of the sustainability that has gained traction, but are you ready for the next? Next slide, please. So what should we do next? Consumers and their expectations will continue to evolve. But when asked shoppers what would help with changing their behaviour, the number one reason to help with reduced footprint was less packaging. So as an industry, we need to create choice, have less packaging wherever possible, have the data to back up sustainability claims, and show very clearly how they benefit the end user. Thank you. I think this is a really key point. So sustainability is personal. And growth in this area is really to be found at the intersection of healthy for me and healthy for we. This feels like a natural fit for the book industry in terms of promoting well-being through reading in the good for me. And the challenge really for us, I believe, will be in the getting the good for we, the sustainability angle right. Worth remembering, though, that 38% of consumers are willing to pay for a premium for high-quality products that deliver on sustainability and environmental goals. Next slide, please. As if we need proof of this, we just have to look at the 6.2 billion market that has arisen in the reusable water bottle market, where it's become a little bit of a fashion statement. There is an opportunity for businesses to carve out a healthy business if it addresses the needs of sustainability. It's not just about the plastic. There's all sorts of things popping up. New search engine Ecosio is giving a majority of their income back to the environment, and actually now that they've reinvested some of their profits into planting over 87 million trees. Next slide, please. And no overview of this subject would be complete without a nod to the fact of veganism becoming mainstream. Many on this webinar in the publishing book trade will already be very familiar with the surge in books published on this topic. Vegan lifestyle is also linked to environmental benefits as it uses less resources than meat and helps with reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. So, the future of sustainability. Well, sustainability is here to stay. Businesses that deliver in this area will grow in influence. We'll see an exponential rise in demand for sustainable products and sustainable focused retailers in emerging markets. Next slide, please. And that concludes my context and overview today. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you find the points you raised interesting and that has provided a useful scene setter for the next speakers that will look in more specifically at how environmental impact is being addressed in the book industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, and I think we have a virtual round of applause. We've got a few minutes for questions, so if you want to ask Jo a question, please put a message, please stay muted, but put a message into the chat box and I will then invite you to speak. I'll just wait a few moments and just see. You don't have to ask the question in the chat box, just say I'd like to ask a question, or just me or something. A few moments. Everyone's being very, very shy. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Jo. I appreciate your time and very, very informative slides, which hopefully we will be able to share more widely later on. So thank you for your time, and if you're staying for the rest of the webinar, please do. Yeah, thank you very much. So we will now move on to our next speakers. there are two speakers for this next session called Making the Books. And so if I just get on to the next slide, I would like to invite Lisa Ferratro, Director of Environment and Sustainability at CPI Books, and Fiona McIntosh, Orion Group Production Director at Orion Books. So that they're going to talk us through the concerns and pitfalls and challenges and opportunities with regards to actually making the books. So welcome to the virtual stage. Please, both of you, I know I'm stating the obvious, but check that you are unmuted, and I will hand over to you. When you need another slide, just say next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. I'd like to say well done, Joe. I think that was a great presentation, obviously, to start us off. I'm Lisa, by the way. Me and Fiona are actually sitting together despite the coronavirus.
Indeed we are. And I'm Fiona. Because our presentation anticipated this very much as a conversation, so we will probably ramble a bit, but I hope that you can keep track of our ramblings. Thank you.
Okay.
Fiona, we're having trouble. We can't hear you, Fiona. So if you can get closer to the microphone.
Okay.
That's better.
Thank you. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, much
Thank
better.
you. Okay. I was just making an introduction to say that we had anticipated this as a chat, and so we will be chit-chatting away. I will try not to ramble.
Okay, thank you.
So this was just to give a little bit of an overview of some of the stats that we've pulled together to give us a little bit of focus. Sold last year in the UK was 190 million books, and of those, the carbon footprint currently being published for book consumption is 2.7 to 4 kilos of carbon dioxide emissions. This actually totals the equivalent of 190 million African forest elephants, and I'll show you a little picture of what one of those looks like.
So that's lots of elephants. So we need to make sure that our buying decisions are the right ones.
Into context, actually, there is 784 million tonnes of carbon dioxide emitted from the UK each year. That's based on 2018 figures. So therefore, even though our carbon emissions are high as a total of the UK market, it's 0.09% of that. Obviously, what we are also aware of is our sold books is not the same as our manufactured books. And that's the part that we will be looking to focus on, particularly in CPI, about how we can get a carbon footprint per book of each book that we produce. And that will be in the coming years. But if we can go to the next slide. Focus is for us, we believe, as an industry, from printing point of view and also through to publishers, is the focus and targets in the next year or so. So for us, it's about green energy in the production of books. Are we zero to landfill at CPI? We are 99%. There are elements that can't be recycled through the waste streams that are currently available. But that's about giving you figures so that you can be consistent and give facts to your authors and also to consumers. We will be looking to see how we can reduce the carbon footprint of each book through various initiatives, which we'll go into in the next few pages, and also where we can create our own circular economy. So this is how what we use from a production point of view, how we can start to reuse our own waste processes. So can we do any recycling physically on site so that we're not increasing our carbon footprint by sending things and waste segregating, and that's what we'll be focusing on in the coming year. Next.
So, supplier selection for when you're manufacturing your books. This is obviously the whole part of the supply chain that the departments around publishers get involved with. So before they make their decisions, there are a lot of things that they need to be looking at. And apart from anything else, we also have to have the right mindset when we're making those decisions. One of the things that Hachette is very keen on is indeed making sure that our environmental credentials are as good as they can be. And we've approached this from lots of different ways. We have a very engaged workforce right up and down the building, not just in the production teams, but right across the staff. We have a minimum of 2 what we call networks, which are focusing.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we're having difficulty hearing you, Fiona. You keep breaking up. Are you able to get closer to the microphone?
I shall move around. So I hope that that's a little bit better.
Yeah, that's much better.
I was just saying that. Good. Okay. It's because we're sharing one computer in one room. So to make the decision, there are lots and lots of different ways that we get to the final decision where we are. But the first important thing is employee engagement. And at Hachette, we're very strong on this. We have a minimum of 2 networks which focus indeed on the environment and the well-being of not only our staff, but also the whole consumer supply chain. So we have a very engaged and active workforce who are making sure that we're doing the right thing within the building and doing the right thing in choosing our supplier base. So how do we do that? Well, there are a number of different ways, but supply chain auditing obviously is very important. So we are members of Book Chain. We make sure that we ask our suppliers all the right questions, and Lisa will be going into some of the details about what they do as suppliers to be able to answer those questions. I think that the lessons that we have learned using FSC accreditation processes are proving to be very useful so that we can then apply those to a wider range of auditing and the more environmental and ethical auditing that we do. So that's what we do to make sure that we're choosing the right supplier at a broad level, but obviously there are a lot of specifics that we need to ask questions on, and we're learning every day. We learn something new.
As a supplier that's hopefully selected to produce a book, we are looking to focus in the areas that in the coming year, I believe, will actually be, we'll start to see more of this from the supermarkets. They're very much using the 4 R's, which is to remove where we can remove any additional packaging, to reduce where we can reduce either the weight of what we use. So obviously Joe is right in that there's been a large focus on plastic use, and as printers we do wrap our products into plastic for safe transportation. It's very lightweight, so it actually doesn't increase your carbon emissions for your transport, so there's a benefit to one side. It is also a fully recyclable product, so anything where it's going, it doesn't go to consumer, it goes to warehouses, and warehouses remove and recycle that. It's about making sure, can we reduce the weight of that shrink wrap? Can we recycle everything that we have on site and that is being produced? And can we, where possible, reuse to create that circular economy? Next slide, please. So going into the book materials and what we produce to make a book, and obviously for us, we are a printer, so it is all about the printed product. So this was to give you some facts around some of the elements that we use within CPI, and to give you some information really. So paper, everything we produce within CPI is actually from a sustainable resource, actually comes through the FSC route. And to give you some figures, the European forests grew by 44,000 kilometres since 2005 to 2015. That actually is the size of, larger than the size of Switzerland, to give that some context. So obviously this is a great thing for paper production and the way in which we purchase paper and the books that we're producing. Recycling at printer actually goes off afterwards if there is waste, where we can't reduce that waste, and goes off to make corrugated packaging, newspapers and tissue and hygiene products. So they all have an end purpose. The inks that we use are vegetable-based inks, so again from a sustainable resource. Currently, cold set inks are mineral based, so they do come from oil, but it is a byproduct of the oil industry. It's not the reason that we drill for oil. In the same way that for glue, we do have some animal byproducts. Again, it's a byproduct of that industry, not a requirement. But there are mineral based glues as well. So that's the focus for us as a printer in how we can potentially look to see where we can remove any of the animal byproducts and move towards the vegan production.
And as any publisher will know, as Joe alluded to, then having a vegan book is now becoming very important, and it's good news to hear that we can actually achieve the same.
Please. Obviously, there has been a very large focus on cover finishing as lamination is a plastic and we can't actually pretend it isn't. I think it's to give some context to that. We, as a sheet of paper, it's a recyclable product. So we have sheets of paper within the waste process that are collected. They are not sorted from any other waste product where we have finishing on them. And they are recycled as a product on its whole, as a whole, to go into those same elements that I mentioned before. It's also when it's a book is recyclable. We don't separate out books that have laminated covers to books that don't.
We've lost you. I don't know if you've moved away from your computer. Hi, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Books are actually, it's not a requirement. They seem to be a very clean product when they're recycled. Each of the two they know is something that has obviously they have a high value from the consumer, but when they go to no, sorry, Karina. So foil has a circular economy in the way that it's produced from the supply chain. It's fully recyclable in its raw form as a product, and it's also recyclable when it's on a sheet or a book. And also we are part of the no foil to landfill, so the waste materials don't go to landfill, they actually go to create cement. They actually burn in the kilns to create cement. And then lastly, on UV varnish and embossing, UV varnish has zero VOC, so it's good, no emissions to atmosphere, and again recyclable. And obviously embossing actually doesn't add anything onto the book itself. There is no element that's left behind. There is a dye that's created to produce an embossed product, but it obviously is reused, so again is following those 4 R's.
So the children's division in particular, of course, are leading the way on making sure that the cover finishes that they choose are as environmentally sustainable as possible. Spot glitter is one of those things which is no longer a thing. Glitter is a big no-no. And I think that we are always constantly looking for new ways of making our book look attractive to the consumers. But we are being led, as indeed Joe referred to, the future consumer is the child, and therefore we are making sure that we give them what they want and they need, and that we can sustain the future of their product as well.
Next slide. So continuing through the waste segregation to again give you this same context of what actually goes to be recycled so that we can achieve our zero to landfill. The plastic that we have on site, which is strapping, shrink wrap and pallet wrap, and I know that's going to be one of the subjects that is a discussion later on in the programme. It actually goes off to be reused into injection moulded plastics such as drain pipes. It also goes off to create chippings for products. So it is reused within the process, and all of it is recycled at our recycled suppliers. The plates are made from aluminium, and again, they're reused and often go off into the automotive construction industry if they're not recycled as a plate itself. Same with dyes, they are recycled into mixed metals, and the inks and chemicals that are used on site actually go off and are biodigested. From that, After that process, there is an ash that does go to a landfill process, but it's quite minimal, which is why we don't state as a printer we are fully zero to landfill. It's about us giving you the actual very small percentage that is going off onto a route currently that can't be recycled as a byproduct. Next, please.
So there are a number of things that as publishers we can do, and reducing our inventory and making sure that we only print what we want and what we can sell, and so that we don't add unnecessary units into the supply chain. So working with a lot of our suppliers, we work from POD, print on demand, so one copy produced as the customer orders it. Automatic stock replenishment, ASR, so that we keep the stock levels in an appropriate way for the consumer demand for that particular title. And zero inventory is something trade publishers find difficult, but I know that the academic world has embraced. So there is a lot that we can do as publishers to make sure that we are producing the right book for the right person at the right time, and not overproducing or underproducing. Not easy.
As printers, we believe, and as an industry, we actually have done a lot already. And a lot of this is because commercially it makes sense, or because it's been driven by publishers to encourage printers to reduce both waste within the process. So obviously, we have invested heavily in digital technologies to reduce waste and energy use. We also do direct deliveries from printers to retailers, to ensure that we are moving a book as minimal times as possible through the supply chain. We have a global print solution so that you can produce into the place of that is being asked for the books, so that we're not air freighting or sea freighting all books around the globe. And obviously, as printers, we've moved very much heavily into waste segregation. Commercially, as a business, this is it makes sense for us. The value in that has massively dropped in the last year, but we need to ensure that all of our waste is segregated correctly to make sure we're being responsible as a supplier, and also making sure that all of that waste goes off and does actually is recycled into the right waste streams. Next, please. So for us, we just thought we would then look at what are our next steps. This is something that I know that is going on further on in the presentation. So for us, we are looking to identify the areas where we can pick those 4 R's. So where can we reduce, remove and reuse? And I think it's really important that we publish those facts to our publishers to ensure that they're aware of the journey we're on. We may not make all of our targets, but it's about publishing what those targets are going to be, and then identifying where we missed, and then what we are doing to either refocus or change that target if it's not achievable. I think we can't be shy in publishing where we're at, or actually all very far along the journey, but technology will change in the coming years, which will mean the things that we do today maybe that actually we have to change them in 3-5 years time, but we need to stay where we are as a printer to enable our publishers to have information for consumers.
And that information gathering is where we are at the moment. So we are listening to our consumers, we're listening to our authors, we're listening to our staff, we're listening to the market, and we are gathering information through auditing, through requesting data, and we are looking at what we can and can't do. And I think that we have started the journey very enthusiastically, and we will continue it, but there is a long way to go, and we have much to learn. But I think that the enthusiasm, the will and the desire is there, and that we will be making changes. Also, of course, engaging our suppliers. All of our suppliers are expected to be able to come up with the responses that we need, and if they aren't engaging themselves in improving their sustainability records, if they are poor, or continuing them if they are good, then we'll be asking long, hard questions about, do we want to continue with the supply chain which is beginning to fall over and not following through on the standards that we expect them to meet?
We need to look end to end for our supply chain. So this will be from purchase product, so from ink supply, glue supply, all the way through energy.
We've lost you again, Lisa, sorry. Lisa, we've lost you. I don't know if you can hear me. I'll give it one more go. Lisa, can you hear us? We've lost you. We may have lost you completely.
No, I think you've got me back.
Oh, there you are. Hello. We didn't hear any of that. Anything you said in the last sort of minute, we didn't catch.
Okay, so for us, I think I might be repeating some you may have heard. So it was the end-to-end for us of the supplier engagement, and how we make sure that we are engaging as a printer all of our suppliers to ensure that we can publish the facts for you as publishers, to make sure that you are getting the information that you need, and that we are using the most up-to-date materials available. As a printer, we will be looking, there was a question earlier about lamination and what we do with that as a printer. So for the lamination part, we can, laminated sheets are fully recyclable within the current waste streams available. We don't separate out laminated product from product that has foil or spot UV. We don't separate those at all. They go off to be fully recycled. And we also don't separate our books that go to be recycled, have either laminated covers or not laminated covers. So they are fully recyclable, they are handled within that supply chain, and that's how we make sure when we get this end-to-end supplier engagement that we are reviewing what's available in the market. There are some new laminates that are coming onto the market around vegetable-based lamination. They're not quite ready to manufacture, but that is something we'll definitely be keeping all of our publishers involved with. To make sure that you have the most up-to-date information and that you're producing the books that you need to. And then lastly, on circular economy, that's how we make sure that are we using the whole supply chain. So when we deliver into warehouses, is there a way that we can reduce and work closer together, make sure that that transport supplier is actually being efficient, coming into you, dropping something off, and then actually taking something away and going somewhere else. So that we make sure that we have a fully end-to-end supply chain.
So that's where we are at the moment, really. We're talking to each other all the time. Our supply chain is based on partnerships, and I think that we need to be able to make sure that all the links all the way through are working, and that there are still, as I said earlier, lots of questions. And I was very impressed by Joe's presentation, which was very enthusiastic about plastic stuff. And I think that we can learn from that and apply it to what we're doing. And I'm looking forward to listening to the next presentations about the retail side of the business. So thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, both of you, very much for presenting and for taking the time to join us today. Really, really interesting activity that's going on at CPI. Just had a question in from one of our attendees asking, do you use soya ink as a vegetable-based ink? And how do you ensure that they're traceable, as soya can have a big environmental impact?
Okay, so yes, currently our vegetable-based ink is. I have engaged the supplier that we are using to see what's fully traceable. So at the moment, we don't have that information, but we are looking to, we have a large questionnaire that's gone out to all of our suppliers to get more up-to-date information on the full supply chain for them. All of us are on this journey. We don't have all of the information immediately, but if I will find out from Karina actually who's asked that, and we'll look to see if we can actually give this information out to people once we have it, so that you don't feel that they're not answered.
Okay, thank you. That would be wonderful. Another question is was about vegetable-based lamination. Do you have a rough idea how far away we are as an industry from seeing that?
So there is a UK supplier currently that has produced. We have tested it. Currently it isn't strong enough for what we need within book production. So we'll be working with that supplier in the coming months. They are already selling this product, but it's not good enough currently for a mass market manufacture.
Oh, we've lost you again. We can't hear you. Lisa, I don't know if
you heard that.
No, we didn't. We didn't.
I lost connection. Okay, so I think it will be months, possibly a year. The product is already available. It's not quite strong enough for a mass manufacture, but we're going to be working with the supplier. It's actually a UK-based product, which is great for everything we've spoken about. They are a UK company, and they have a circular economy as a supplier. So it's absolutely the right type of people we want to be working with, but we need to make its choice fit for purpose. And even though it will add cost, it's more about making sure that we can actually do everything we need to do with it.
Okay, thank you. And then another question has come in. Have you encountered any business resistance to the initiatives that you're talking about, or is the agenda now universally welcomed and prioritised, do you think?
Oh. So from a publisher point of view, obviously we have to balance the commercials with the environmental sustainability, but we wouldn't, the environment, the sustainability question is now as important, and so we will always be trying to find ways to make it work.
Okay, thank you. And another question. They're all coming in now. Do either of you have anything to share about your response to the UK government's commitment to bringing all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, and how achievable does that feel? Big question.
That's a rather big question. I think and this is a personal thing for me. It's not certainly not a CPI point of view. Until we measure it, we don't know how achievable it is for us as a printer, because we need to know where we are. But I feel that very much we are on the beginning of a journey, and it's very much the small steps that we need to make. There will be some easy wins, I think, along the way. And then as we get closer to the targets, it will become more and more difficult. But this is where you look for industry and manufacturers and suppliers to actually have come up with other solutions that enable us to look to get there. As you look now, I don't think we can fully see that we will get there, but that's where technology will play its part.
Okay.
I agree with
yeah, I was just going to ask you, Fiona, if you share the same view.
I do. It is a very big question, and there is a lot that we as publishers can't personally action, but we can certainly put pressure on the supply chain to make sure that they are doing things. Electric vehicles is one of the most obvious ones that people will think of.
Yeah.
And I know that Lisa drives an electric car, so she's walk the walk. So.
Okay, and then I've got another question. Just interested, you talk about a vegan book. Could you tell us a bit more about what constitutes a vegan book?
Okay, so for CPI, as a printer, pages are vegan. It's the glue within the book that is has an animal byproduct in it. And it's all to do with heating of temperatures. It affects some hardback production in the UK, and that's something that we'll be looking at. We can produce a vegan book now, but only on 1 or 2 of our lines, not all of our lines.
Okay, great. And is there any different in terms of sort of performance of vegan glue? Is there any in terms of performance, I guess. Is there any difference between one and the other?
No, there isn't. And obviously, what I would say, as much as yes, it's a vegan glue, it is petroleum based. So it becomes about the question of an animal byproduct versus a petroleum based product.
Yes. So
and I'm not a scientist.
One for another. Yes, it's a difficult one, isn't it? So you're swapping one ethics for another ethics issue.
Yes.
Possibly. Okay, how are we doing for time? I think we're right on time. So unless another question pops in the next 10 seconds, I think we are done. So I would like to thank you very much, both of you. One last question, very quickly squeezed in right at the last minute. What actions are you taking to reduce plastic wrap? I know that's coming up in the presentation shortly.
So for CPI, we have reduced the weight of our shrink wrap. So we're reducing the tonnage that we purchase, both in the shrink wrap of the parcels themselves and also within the pallet wrap that we use to transport. I know there is a presentation on it later around reducing or removing the pallet wrap completely. So for us, it's about reducing the weight. Obviously, for us, it's also that it's fully recycled on site and also at warehouses. But at the moment in the UK, to swap the cardboard is a big investment for most printers. It also increases the weight of what you transport. So then there's another calculation that needs to be done around increased transport versus plastic, which is recyclable, and cardboard manufacture.
Okay.
And as publishers, all we can do is pressurise our supply chain and take a look at our own distribution and try and reduce plastic use whenever we can. It's all about keeping pressure on.
Yes, and this is definitely something that BIC is keen on, being, you know, a supply chain organisation. So yes, it's I've made notes. So I think that's it. There are other questions coming through, unfortunately, but we're going to go over time if we address them, I'm afraid. But we'll collect them from our chat box. So any we don't answer, we can pass on. So I would like to thank both Lisa and Fiona for a really interesting, insightful presentation. Lots of excellent initiatives going on there, and really useful information. So I will now move on to our next session, which is about we've made the books, and now what we're going to be doing is distributing, selling, and return. Well, hopefully not too many returns, but they do happen. So we're going to start with looking at operational efficiency targets and how they can be married with being green. Is it the perfect partnership? So I will hand over to our next speaker, Stephen Day, formerly Senior Vice President, Supply Chain Global Operations at Pearson PLC. So Stephen, just a reminder to unmute yourself.
I have done that, so hopefully you can hear me.
Excellent.
Okay.
I will hand over to you. So when you need another slide, if I haven't already got there, please just prompt me by, you know, just let me know you need it.
Okie dokie, and I've got my timer on as well, so I know how much time I have to go on to. So firstly, good morning everyone. Very nice to get the opportunity to talk to you virtually. I thought I'd start by a quick quote that I came across yesterday at another conference I attended on the very topic of sustainability. And the speaker said that the sustainability revolution appears to have the scale of the industrial and agricultural revolution, but at the speed of the information generation. And I thought that was very, very poignant, because I think in spite of some of the macroeconomic factors we're facing at the moment, unfortunately with the virus, the truth is, and certainly my belief is, that the transformational transformation opportunity available to us as we think about greening everything we do in our business is absolutely enormous. And that's what I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking to you about. First slide, please. We've already heard from the speaker from Nielsen about what does the supply chain today contribute to, thank you, in terms of waste. This is a piece of research that HP did quite recently where they looked at what was the environmental contribution for around $100 million worth of book sales. And I think you would all agree that those numbers are really quite startling in terms of what is contributed today in terms of the environmental impact. And of course, it goes without saying that across all of those various dimensions, great efforts are being taken historically to improve performance. And I'm very sure that the focus will continue, as many of the people have spoken about this morning, in terms of continuing to beat down on these particular elements of the supply chain. And what I'll be talking about is some of the other things that I think we need to begin to start thinking about as we really begin to start accelerating our efforts in terms of greening up what we do in the business. Next slide, please. I heard one of the speakers talk a little bit about educational publishing, so you'll forgive me if I just say a few words about that, because the truth is, although one might think that physical publishing is dead within the education publishing world, in truth, the research shows that educational publishing and physical content continues to be a very valuable format for learners. There's a not-for-profit organisation that recently produced some really compelling statistics in terms of how learners use and retain information through the power of print, and how they felt that they built better skills in terms of learning through the use of print necessarily than just digital. So very interesting there. There's a typo there, 88% on the third bullet, but in this very troubling times, I thought it was worth making the point that the research also went on and said that a bigger proportion of folks are more likely to believe what they read in printed press than what they see in digital media press. And again, I think you'd all agree, with so much fake news out there at the moment, you do begin to wonder where authenticity and versions of the truth sit. Having said all of that, though, blended learning and blended content consumption is becoming an increasingly important focus for educational publishers. And as we think about our colleagues in trade publishing, blending together digital content, audio content, and physical content is becoming a big operational challenge. Next slide, please. Turning to the operational challenges, I think this will be a slide that is very familiar to many people that run physical operations in publishers, but we're often grappling with the issue of latency in our inventory versus the absolute demand for the front list title. And this is a piece of research that I've worked on over the course of the past several months, which shows the relationship between the inventory that we're holding to support our sales and the composition of the front list, mid list, and back list. And what is startling is that publishers really grapple with interpreting the volatility of demand and the point at which they should convert their ordering and replenishment processes away from offset into a more agile fulfillment model. And if you think of FMCG businesses, for example, it would be unheard of in their business to fill their channels with inventory or hold inventory in their business, which ultimately they have to pulp or dispose of. But the truth is, and it's one that often many publishers don't talk about, is the amount of pulping that continues to go on today is really quite substantial, and it's one that few folks really appraise any kind of environmental cost to. The other point I feel very strongly about is the amount of book miles where we're having product travel around the world, either from the point of manufacture to the point of distribution, or for that matter, where our customers sit, continues to be a very significant environmental cost that I don't think necessarily gets recognised in the way that it should today. Next slide, please. As I think about the environmental context for supply chain, I think one of the things that we should recognise is that it's very much a kind of evolution. So where you see the majority of the green is in this slide is where I think progress has been made. So we started the journey a long time ago in terms of sustainable paper supply. Many folks have looked very hard at working practices and making sure that people within the supply chain work in safe environments. We've increasingly imposed upon our print service providers some standards in terms of how we expect them to run and operate their facilities. Increasingly, our focus is on the type of chemicals that get used either in the recycling of pulpit paper or its manufacture. Colleagues at CPI spoke about that very clearly a few moments ago. I think the areas where I do think we need to begin to start focusing our attention is increasingly in terms of what's the physical carbon costs of running our supply chain, what are the costs associated with the pulping of the inventory that we create, and the one at the top, which is the cloud. You know, a lot of folks are moving into a world of data where they think that the storage of data in cloud type storage solutions has no environmental impact. Well, of course, that's simply not the case. Large data centers require enormous amounts of energy, both to keep them running and operating, but in many cases to keep the environment in which that equipment operates working to a degree that allows it to operate and manage. And I think it's all incumbent on us as we move into this world of data, where we really begin to start asking ourselves the type of data that we are running in our data centers or in the clouds. Is it valuable data that is worth preserving, or is it data that we should begin to start purging our systems on, so we can begin to start giving some kind of measure and understanding to that as well? Turning to the next slide, please. So as I think about the 4 challenges operationally to begin to start really greening up the supply chain, I think we are going to move increasingly from a model where we have large amounts of inventory in our warehouses through to a much more on-demand type solution. I heard one of the colleagues a moment ago talk about zero inventory in the educational publishing world. It's a phrase, frankly, that I used extensively at Pearson. I don't think it's a particularly helpful one because it doesn't describe what it is that you are trying to do. And in truth, all we're trying to do is satisfy demand with product in a way which is much more compatible with the demand of the customer, rather than necessarily sitting in warehouses around the world anticipating a demand when we don't know whether it's going to arrive or not. And many of you will know that represents a very significant challenge in terms of how you reconfigure your operations and your supply chain. But nonetheless, I think that's exactly the direction that many of us will see our businesses going in the future. The other thing that I think we're going to have to work very hard on is the formats by which we manufacture and supply. So it's certainly the case that Offset gives us the opportunity to be very elaborate in the design and the format of our product. I think in truth, certainly in educational publishing, I think the demand is there for much more simplified formats and print. And of course, if we're honest with each other, that's a big challenge for some of the authors and the editorial teams out there. But certainly I've witnessed some enormous changes over the course of the past several years. And I think in aligned to much of what we talked about previously in terms of how we can begin to start using different types of chemicals and materials, we also need to accept that we need to begin to start simplifying the format of the product. Files, we come from a world where files are distributed around the world, sitting in some cases with printers, sometimes with the editorial teams. I think we've really got to get much better at the overall management of data and workflow. for many of the reasons that I spoke to a minute ago, which is, you know, data does come at an environmental cost. It's not for free. But also, as we really try to simplify and streamline our businesses, I think we need to begin to start getting much better at holding that data in central repositories so we can really move our operations into a much more agile, on-demand type model. And finally, from centralized to decentralized, I, in spite of the fact that I had a job title which would suggest a kind of centralist point of view in terms of how you should run operations, I think in truth, particularly for print, we need to begin to start moving much more to a decentralized model, but using the controls of on-demand, simplified and clear data stewardship and workflow management, so that we can begin to start moving production much more adjacent to where our customers are, rather than having it in central locations. So they were the points that I wanted to make, and I just wanted to leave one final thing, which is in the same conference I attended, the speaker went on and made a final comment, which was the whole environmental approach that we now need to drive forward is probably the most significant economic event that a generation of people will have ever faced. And if we think about the government's 2050 target, certainly I would argue that I don't think that is anything like as ambitious as it needs to be in order for us to make a radical course correction so that we can safeguard the future for our children and the generations thereafter. Thank you, Karina. That's all from me.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Just very quickly, what I will do is we will take questions, because we've got these a session of 3 mini sessions. What we'll do is we'll take questions at the end of the third one. Very interesting, Stephen. Interested to hear your comparing the Industrial Revolution to the environmental revolution. So I think that's something to think about, definitely. So before we go on to our next presenter then, just a few reminders. You've all been very good with the background noise, so thank you for staying muted. I do appreciate that. If you want to see more information about the speakers, the sponsors or the programme, do go onto our website and have a look. And we're very busy on social media at the moment, so join in if you want to. So I'm going to hand over now to our next speaker, Neil Springle, Head of Operations at Penguin Random House. And Neil is going to talk to us today about the measures being taken by distributors to reduce plastic, and also the responsibilities that organisations have to order and carry out returns. Stephen, if you'd like to mute yourself if you haven't already, I can hear a little bit of background noise. And Neil, over to you.
Yes, can you hear me, Karina?
Yes, I can, perfectly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I've been a tough act to follow with Stephen. It's a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much, Stephen. Today I've been invited to talk to you about the efforts of Penguin Random House to tackle the current real-time issue of plastic wastage in our environment as part of our sustainability projects across distribution. I'll start by providing some of the most hard-hitting facts and quotes that I've seen about the subject that we are discussing today. And whilst I'm generally very proud to tell colleagues and friends that I am involved in distribution and indeed working for what I believe is one of the most forward-thinking and proactive publishing groups in the world, I realised when reading this first quote to you that we're very much part of the current problem. That in the last 100 years alone, humans have produced 8.3 billion tonnes of plastic. That weighs pretty much the same as 207 million humpback whales. These beautiful and graceful creatures that are now struggling to cope with the plastic waste that ends up in our oceans. If we go to the next slide, please. I entered warehouse operations on the back end of a military career that took me to a wide variety of beautiful countries around the world. And after a 30-year career in engineering, warehousing and logistic operations, this next quote is one that I'm partly embarrassed about, that over 40% of our global plastic usage is indeed in packaging. By 2030, it is believed that 99% of all seabirds will have plastic waste within their stomachs. 80% of the world's ocean debris today is believed to be plastic waste, and in 1 minute, 1 million new plastic bags are used around the globe. An average of 46,000 tons of plastic waste are floating in every square metre of our ocean today, and more plastic was produced in the last 10 years than in the whole of the last century. Now, a third of the fish in the ocean has traces of plastic, so those like me who have children out there, think this: the main ingredient in all of our grandchildren's recipes will be plastic, a quote that really provides us with reality of what we are doing to the world today. Now, of the plastic usage, a huge 50% is what we call SUPs, single-use plastics. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So I think it's leapt ahead one slide, sorry. If we just go back one. No, okay, there's a slide missing. So I'll go on to the next one with Robert Shaw. And I will tell you, in 2018, our distribution operation alone was guilty of dispatching 80.2 tonnes of single-use plastic waste from our group distribution site in Colchester in Essex alone. Our heaviest usage was indeed, as one might expect, single plastic shrink wrap, followed by the plastic inlay that we place within our cartons before heat sealing them and send them around the world for distribution. We decided after much deliberation that we would set ourselves a very bold and ambitious target of a 75% reduction of single-use plastics of that 80.2 tonnes of plastic. But we revised this as we focused on splitting the operation both down into inbound operations and indeed outbound operations. And I'm quite proud to say that we reduced our inbound single-use plastics by 85% in the first year, and our outbound only 50%. However, as you'd appreciate, a lot of our single-use plastic is still going export and overseas. However, why stop there? We're now looking at other aspects of our Colchester-based operations, both in customer and credit services, our finance department, royalties, and technology, where we have over 350 office-based colleagues, and targeting their single-use plastics, removing all the plastic water cups, dispensers, plastic single-use kitchen utensils, even the single-use plastic sauce sachets within our on-site canteen. Now, I thought this one quote before I move on to the bulk of the presentation today says everything. That the explorer himself says, if we remember no other quote from today, the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that somebody else will save it. We can move to the next slide, please. And the next slide. Okay, so our biggest single investment has been towards pallet lids from a Sheffield-based company named Loadhog. The ability to effectively cap a pallet and subsequently ratchet it down to the base of the pallet to prevent us having to use shrink wrap for its transportation purposes. This was an absolute unique selling point. It provides stability to the pallet and ensure that they remain intact just as well as they have been covered in single-use plastic. This one step alone has allowed us to consider a much wider range of its use, not only for goods inbound from our printers at Clays in Bungay, but also the container handling operations from overseas, but also outbound to key customers and wholesalers who share the same passion for making sure that this generation takes the problem very seriously. Of course, we've had to track these assets around the country, and very cleverly, we've had our technology department actually put RFID tags implemented within the lids itself, so we can scan them out and trace them around the operational cycle. And I was challenged the other day to say, well, these things appear to be great, and you move them out, but then what is the mileage to bring them back again? But we are using closed loop operations where the truck is returning to Colchester in order to bring these lids back. And as you can see from the photo in the bottom right hand corner of this slide, 26 of these lids can stack on top of each other, and the top lid then used to ratchet them down to the bottom pallet for transportation back to our site. If we can move to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that our initial target was a very bold 75% of all operations of reduction of plastic. We revised this somewhat and split it into inbound and outbound. For inbound, as I said earlier, we are proud to say that we've reduced it by 85%. And our friends at Clays actually use the lids to ratchet the books from Clays to go on the round journey of 120 miles down to us. And it really has saved time. On our outbound operations, we calculated that we are using an embarrassing 49 meters of single-use plastic to wrap every single pallet. And so we start to explore more with our outbound customers, the retailers such as Waterstones and the wholesalers at both Gardner's and Bertram's, to reduce the single-use plastic by replacing it by this operational lid. And you can see there colleagues using the lid just to attach it to a pallet outbound, and indeed the bottom one shows our recyclable plastic totes that are used numerous times. And it said that every lid can be used on estimate at least 1,200 times before it requires maintenance on the ratchet straps themselves. We can move to the next slide, please. Concurrently, we instantly decided to target the inner carton wrap, which used to be a plastic infill that we would heat shrink over the top of the books for transit purposing. And we've replaced that with recycling our own packaging that comes in from the Far East to create this flexible and durable packaging void fill material that fits around the books for transit. We're proud to say that we've taken out 100% of our plastic within the cartons. Now all of our outbound cartons have the shredded recycled cardboard inside. We can go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier, what else? Well, on site we have environmental plans to reduce our carbon footprint. We have power reduction initiatives such as LED lighting, light sensors within our car parks, which obviously are based under movement, switches and light sensors in all of the office areas, and a reduction, as I mentioned earlier, single-use plastics within our on-site restaurant. Externally, we're working with our transportation companies to improve route planning and reduce excess mileage, and sharing best practices right across our industry. To the next slide, please. So what next, or the coming soon section of my presentation to you all. In mid-February this year, it was declared that Bertelsmann and its subsidiaries, including Penguin Random House, will be carbon neutral by 2030. I, like many other colleagues here, look forward to the exciting initiatives that are being suggested by the group to continue the work we've collectively achieved throughout the last 16 months within our distribution operation. It is certainly true that you're never too old to learn. And the fact that I myself visited a presentation in November to the Booksellers Association, I was personally challenged why our transit cartons are not reusable, and proceeded to return to Colchester, one might think with my tail somewhat between my legs, to investigate this particular customer's frustration. Working in partnership with our packaging supplier, we've managed to redesign our lids so that from later this month we will be trialling a new design that can be opened and then resealed to allow our cartons to be reused from our independent customers. Such is the power of positive presentation and the ability to listen and indeed learn. Go to the final slide, please. So yes, after extensive trials, we're seriously investing to make a difference. I don't confess to being the best presenter in the world, but the reduction of plastic is something that I care very passionately about. Living on the Suffolk coast, I see the impact it has on our oceans every day when I run down the beach and see the amount of plastic that's actually in the water. And I'm actually quite embarrassed to tell my children that I have contributed so much to it in the last 30 years. Now, I believe I have a couple of minutes. One other area I had been asked by Karina just to touch on was shipping. Because indeed, if we're polluting the world, then shipping is one that is certainly costing us, or costing the environment. Emissions from container ships include CO2, sulfur dioxide and nitric oxide. And if international shipping, container shipping was indeed a country, it would actually sit as 7th in the world for poor emissions. The 15 largest container ships around the globe create more sulfur dioxide than every single car in the world put together. That really does show the impact that shipping has. Now, it is still the most preferred method. Colleagues earlier spoke about air and reduction in air. We are looking as a group to try and reduce our air freight, because we think that heavily adds to pollution. And we're also talking to our shipping freight forwarders methods how we can reduce it. Somebody asked me the other day, why don't we look at electric powered ships? Well, there is indeed an electric powered ship that has been designed by the Chinese. It currently is able to do 50 miles in one journey, a speed of only 8 miles per hour, or the equivalent of 8 miles per hour. However, it is currently used as a cargo ship to take coal to a factory, which I find kind of really defeats the object. But I appreciate today this is merely a brief overview of the projects that Penguin Random House have decided to focus on in the last 16 months. The initial investment and subsequent development of ideas has really been the bedrock of our success today. And I'll leave you with a simple thought and the picture on the right, which I think perfectly sums up the current situation. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Well, thank you very much. Some rather mind-blowing statistics there, and some fantastic initiatives going on at PRH. I was just thinking as you were talking how what an amazing industry the book publishing world is. some quite impressive activity going on in the environmental space. So thank you very much, Neil. As I've said, we'll take questions right at the end after this third presentation. So we've distributed the books, we've made them, we've distributed them, and now we are selling them. So in this final of our mini sessions, I'm going to invite Kate McHale, who is the campaign manager at Waterstones, to talk to us about the steps being taken by Waterstones to reduce their environmental impact. And we're going to cover topics such as bags, ordering, delivery, storage, etc. Thank you, Neil. If you would like to mute yourself if you haven't already, and Kate, if you would like to unmute yourself, and I will hand the floor to you.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Marvellous. Good morning, everyone. As Karina says, I'm Kate McHale, the campaign manager for Waterstones, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the steps that we've been taking to reduce our environmental impact. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, Waterstones is the UK's largest specialist chain of bookshops. We have almost 300 shops across the UK, Ireland and Europe, 2 offices in London and Alton, and a warehouse known as The Hub, based in Burton-on-Trent, which processes and supplies books throughout the business. So that's a fair amount of infrastructure. So when looking at what changes we could make, we knew that it would be important to make sure we considered all aspects of our business. To do this, we put together a steering group with people from a variety of roles and locations that could bring their different areas of knowledge to the challenge. We also established an open channel to booksellers and all staff to offer up all the suggestions that they could think of. And we really did decide to look at anything and everything. What's been really great is the enthusiasm with which this is being done. If you can get a few thousand people looking out for opportunities, then they really do seem to be everywhere. And much as we're doing here today, we realise that cooperation and the sharing of ideas, along with the willingness to act on them, would be key. So I'd like to briefly tell you about some of the changes we've already made and some of the things we're aiming for this year. Next slide, please. So in our shops, so some of the most obvious actions we've taken are, of course, those which are customer facing. So for example, just before Christmas, we introduced paper bags into our shops. These will gradually replace our plastic bags, which were themselves made from a low density recycled plastic. But these will be replaced as we run through the stocks of those. So the new paper bags, along with, I'm sure you'll agree, being rather fetching, have got the benefit of being completely recyclable, biodegradable, and made from responsibly sourced FSC approved material. When planning the range of bags, we looked at the data from the review that the Environment Agency did ahead of the bag levy, which states that the key factor in determining the carbon impact of bags is the number of times they can be reused. So our large paper bags have been designed to be reused up to 4 times, to bear that in mind. We also provided guidance to our booksellers around their use, emphasising the fact that we offer these as an option, not as a default. And the bag levy raises money for our partner charity Book Trust. Similarly, and like many other retailers, we switched off things like automatic till receipts. As with bags, the key thing is customers saying yes to something that they actually want rather than getting something that they're just going to immediately throw away. We've also turned off things like zero balance receipts for gift cards, little bits and pieces like that. These are the kind of things that you need a bookseller to point out before really realising how pointless they are. We've also moved to gift cards made from card rather than plastic, and there's an example there on the slide. The new cards are 100% FSC approved, biodegradable and compostable. We've also introduced an e-gift card that can be scanned from the till, scanned at the till from your phone. In our cafes, so we have our own branded cafe called Cafe W. We've also been working closely with our suppliers to reduce packaging and to switch to more sustainable options. For example, we've largely now switched over from plastic to glass bottles. And crucially though, we're making these changes, we make sure that things like having a recycling pickup in place is also done. We've also looked at things like coffee cups, sandwich packaging, straws, replacing and reducing whatever we can across those ranges. The work here is ongoing and we're working closely with existing suppliers and finding new ones who share our priorities on this. What we don't want is just to take the eco-friendly option that somebody has. We want to work with businesses who are also taking that idea throughout their whole approach. So it's not just about the coffee cup itself, it's also about how that's packed on the way to us and things like that. We're also keen to promote brands that are doing good elsewhere. For example, we work with Karma Cola, who've established a foundation for their farmers in Sierra Leone, which provides things like scholarships, teacher training, and business support. We also work with Belly Water, who invest in the work of the charity WaterAid, who are bringing clean water to people in 20 countries. So far, they've raised them over £4 million. Belly are also a carbon neutral business. We've also got new initiatives in our cafes put in place, focusing on reducing our food waste, and we're also seeing encouraging success in that area. Next slide, please. So at the same time, we've been working on a number of other less visible things in our branches, and again, working really closely with both our teams internally and our third-party providers. A really simple one, changing our stationery. Obviously, it's quite a large business. We order in bulk across all the business, so we've made sure we're always choosing the best options, and we've also requested for products to be made available where there wasn't a good option. Similarly, we've also looked at what other consumables we use and what can be changed. For example, last month, we were able to change to reusable skin bags for cashing up. This seems like such a small thing, but it's part of a daily process across 300 shops, and that adds up really quickly. So we already had store and office recycling in place, but this year we're going to work on making that easier to use and increasing compliance. As a start, we're providing simple guidance on what can and can't go in. So I think everyone knows what they're doing with cardboard and cans, but I'm sure we've all been caught out wondering about things like coffee cups, paper with staples, various types and colours of plastic. This really should be something that's so routine, so boring at this stage that we just do it automatically, but it's not. So we're going to work on more educational materials, making that just really streamlined, really simple. It also actually costs significantly more to send a bag to landfill than it does to recycle one. So that's not a bad knock-on benefit for us getting it right. Energy usage has also been a really big focus for us. One element of this has been upgrading to more efficient equipment in shops where we can. We invested in more LED lighting last year, with a further raft of shops planned for this year, and we're also upgrading to things like smarter air conditioning systems. Along with these sort of more fundamental upgrades, we're also putting in smart meters and smart controls such as motion sensors and timers for lights and heaters to make sure those are only being used where actually needed. Just as important, we think, is a focus on behaviour. It's obviously easier for someone to just turn the air conditioning down than to install something to do it for them. So one of the things our maintenance teams are talking to shops regularly about is their energy usage and behaviours when they're out and about. On their scheduled visits, they are checking dials, turning down the heating. They're going to review energy usage in each shop, and if it spikes, they're going to try and find out why. This is steady work. It's not something we can just change once and move on. It's about really changing our approach in the long term. As with many of these changes, our aim is to first make sure we're actively identifying areas we can improve, and then looking at what's stopping it. Are we being held back by the wrong materials, the wrong equipment, the wrong approach, or the wrong behaviour? Next slide, please. So some of our changes with the biggest impact have been happening at the hub. We've been reviewing all aspects of packaging, bits within the hub and for delivery to both shops and customers. I think as Neil has just showed us so brilliantly, the materials involved in logistics can really dwarf other areas, and it means that there are real gains to be made here. One of our aims is to eliminate all single-use plastic used within the hub. For example, shrink wrap around totes, plastic coat ties, that kind of thing. So far this year, we're pleased to have been able to reduce this by 9 tonnes. We're also looking at things like sustainable recycled options for e-commerce packaging. Our shop deliveries from the hub have always been primarily in reusable plastic totes. This applies to both deliveries and returns. And it does mean that that part of the process between shops and the hub is already reasonably efficient and uses less single-use material than some of the other elements. But we're still looking at the details of this bit to see where we can make improvements. So, for example, the type of packing within the totes themselves, the way they're sealed, how many books goes into them, and working with our delivery services to see if we can get them to shops in a cleaner way. We also asked Durham University to look at the carbon impact of the reusable totes versus the other options. Obviously, they're reusable, but they don't last forever. So we wanted to make sure we had accurate facts at our disposal so that we could make the right decisions. Again, as Neil said, we've also been working closely with our suppliers on the things that we can change together. So can we change the processes to allow for less packaging, less waste, and more efficiency? This is also fed into some of the products we've been buying, and non-book items in particular have been a focus in terms of discussing with suppliers how we can change the way those are distributed to us. For example, we've already achieved a 23% reduction in cellophane on greetings cards, and the aim is to take that much higher. These are some of the actions we've taken, and we're really pleased to feel a lot of momentum growing behind these changes, with the hope that this will help us carry on challenging our own behaviour and creating a business that becomes fundamentally greener for the long term. We definitely know that there's still plenty of work to be done. Next slide, please. And as a bookseller, I think it's also worth thinking for a moment about the unique position that our industry is in. Many of the things we've talked about here are problems and actions that we share with other industries. And I think the potential there for solutions that can be widely used, widely shared is really great. But we've also got something special going for us. In her speech to the European Parliament last year, Greta Thunberg said that those who have a big platform have a responsibility to use it. Books can have and are having a really big impact in this discussion. The Lost Words has put nature back at the forefront of books for children, with thousands of copies in schools and through bookshops helping to educate and inspire a new generation. More people now understand the concept of rewilding thanks to the success of Isabella Tree, and the support for that approach in our management of the land around us is rapidly growing. Those books and others like them have become part of a national conversation, and people are looking for answers. We've got more books than ever that offer considered, well-researched and compelling ways for people to understand what we're facing. So by choosing and curating and recommending the best of these books, we're absolutely a crucial platform and a key part of this conversation. In December, Waterstones named Greta Thunberg as our Author of the Year. This is a young woman whose words hold a unique power. Her words have changed and are changing our world and people's response to this crisis. And I think that's a reminder for booksellers and all of those involved in our brilliant industry that words are our business and we should never underestimate their impact and our potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, words and their impact very, very particularly poignant for our industry. Thank you ever so much, Kate, for that. We're now in the section for questions. I think we're doing okay for time. Yeah, so we have until about 11:45 if we want it for questions. So what I'll do is I'll start with Kate. Actually, we've been asked that the observation is made that binders parcels are a cause for concern, even though they are recyclable. But there is a sense that printers need to engage more directly with retailers. do you think, well, do you share that view, and how willing might Waterstones be, and other retailers to work with printers on this? So we're looking at the sort of the print end of the supply chain, and then the sales end of the supply chain. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important that all bits of this chain are linking up and having those conversations. And kind of as I said, we're kind of working with a range of suppliers, a range of other bits of the chain to figure out those kind of solutions. And so if someone has a suggestion about that, we're definitely open to it. Yeah,
I mean, it might be something that the BIC's physical supply chain committee could address as well. Maybe if we get it on our agenda, that might be a good forum to start, maybe. Another question, another one for Waterstones. Here we go, Kate. Somebody's asked, they would love to know what stationery Waterstones have switched to, as they're struggling to find green or greener stationery themselves. Are you able to, if you're not able to share, that's fine, but if you are able to, it would be good. It would be great to hear.
So we have a company that supplies all our stationery, and I think they had a number of eco-friendly options. But there's been quite a lot of work done over the last year just to keep letting them know the things that we regularly buy, and then asking them for those options. So I think it's always worth asking the question, because sort of, as someone at the retail end, I definitely know that questions from customers can often prompt quite a rapid response.
Yes. Okay. I have a question for Neil. Hang on, if I just logically go through them, that might make more sense. So with regards to plastic usage, we think that the slide with regards to a third of fish in the ocean, etc., that slide is really thought-provoking, and it's a request for permission to share it with obviously the credit with the penguin logo, etc. Is that something that you'd be happy for people to do?
I certainly have no problem with that. I mean, all these quotes are available online anyway. They are simply extracts from different background reading that I've done into the subject personally. There are some really scary ones out there. Sadly, in this environment of fake news, you obviously have to get them checked out. But they are all credited online where I've obtained these from. So these are factual ones from scientists around the world and studies that have been conducted on the oceans.
Okay, thank you. And another question for you, Neil. Has switching from plastic infill to recycled cardboard infill, have you noticed an increase or a decrease in damage claims from customers?
It's quite interesting. We had the challenge initially, and it certainly has cost us money, because we now have to have colleagues working where an automated system used to be to actually put the infill in. But better education after we initially launched it of colleagues not putting enough infill in has got it now, so we receive very few complaints, and we haven't noticed an increase at all. Initially there was some concern on whether the shredded card was actually scratching certain titles, but concurrently that we've shrink wrapped, or sorry, we're not shrink wrapped, that's the wrong thing to say. We've actually used a brown bag to, a bit like you see on the market traders stalls, to put around some of the real easily damaged and foil covered books that we have in our selection at the moment, and we do that as part of the goods inbound. So when they're picked into the carton, if you like, and covered in this shredded card, then they're actually in a brown paper bag.
Okay, thank you. And also for you, Neil, where would you advise publishers or smaller publishers to focus their investment in order to make the biggest change? What are the quick wins?
Arguably reduction of plastic shrink wrap, but I mean the lids are not, commercially the lids are not cheap by any stretch of imagination. But we've continued to work with Load Hog. Load Hog have had a number of calls since they entered into the industry via Penguin Random House, and they're looking at methods to try and reduce the cost of the lid itself. But we've certainly gone quite commercially into this, because we believe it's the right thing to do. And like I say, interesting there, the outstanding presentation we just had on Waterstones. They're very much come on board with that, as have Smiths. A lot of the retailers now looking at these and saying, yes, we can probably make a bigger impact ourselves. But for the smaller publishing groups out there, it's really just to get on board and just look at your own operations and say, well, what single-use plastics do I use and what can I remove? I mean, the canteen plastic one-use utensils is certainly one that we can all make the impact. So we started with straws, and yes, we moved on to single-use plastics, but within our own operations and indeed our own office environments, you're absolutely amazed how much single-use plastic we actually use. So I would probably concentrate and target in those areas to start with.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Stephen. What are your thoughts on how we outline and measure data sustainability for the book business?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because some of the things that I think we need to look at into the future don't have specific measures in place today that I think we need. So one of the obvious ones is our immaturity at measuring the carbon that we generate by book miles, for example, and data is but one other element of that. So in truth, I think this is going to be very evolutionary. There are a number of industry forums today that kind of measure data center consumption, but as many of us are moving away from our own data centers into cloud solutions from people like Amazon and Microsoft, we're going to have to become increasingly reliant on them to provide that information for us. I think the one thing that we collectively need to watch, though, is that obviously there is a sense, I think, as people put data into cloud, that they think that somehow that's a really cheap, low-cost solution. In truth, if you don't manage and harvest that data very carefully, that cost is going to increase quite significantly. So the only leading indicator you have today, I think, in terms of environmental data storage is whether your data storage costs are getting out of control. And if they are, then it follows that for sure you've got a data management issue, and for sure you are contributing inefficiently to carbon as it relates to data. But in terms of a precise measure today, I don't know of one.
Okay, interesting question. Yes, it's all about, if you want to measure your improvement, you need a start point, don't you?
You do, and I think that's, there's a couple of things that I've spoken to this morning where I think there will need to be some kind of industry level and cross-industry level investment and alignment to begin to start measuring some of these input costs a bit more efficiently than we have done thus far.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, thank you. And then a question for all three, really, all three speakers. Is there a good enough pathway to scale up these innovations into solutions that the whole book industry could adopt? Or is that a separate webinar?
Maybe I can be bold enough to go first. No, I don't think there is. And I think there is a need for the industry to come together, I think, on a couple of things. One of which is the treatment of data and how we capture it and how we manage it holistically through the life cycle, from the point of title creation right through to the retailers, and as we know, returns as well. I think it's really important that we begin to start beating down on what data do we really need to run our businesses successfully. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I think we've got to work in unison with the print service providers, and I think we've got to be very careful that this is not used as a stick to beat up the PSPs to somehow reduce their costs even further. Because if many of you know what's going on in North America right now, is a very ugly situation where two of the biggest PSPs are on their knees. So that we have to acknowledge that in some cases costs will go up, and it doesn't necessarily mean that has to be a cost that the PSP has to handle in isolation. And then the third thing is, I think that makes it very incumbent on the publishers to look more holistically across their cost base. So manufacturing costs typically get treated as the cost of sale. Large parts of some of these costs that I've spoken about today get treated in the operating expense. So I think in truth, we've got to look at all of those costs holistically to figure out what's the most efficient way economically to handle this going forward, rather than just tackling isolated costs that cause other members of the supply chain community real indigestion.
Oh, agreed. Neil, interested to hear your thoughts on that question.
Well, personally, I just echo exactly what Stephen's just said very eloquently, to be fair. I very much agree that we need to come together as an industry to tackle initiatives of this scale and nature. I mean, the opportunities are endless, to be fair. And when you're a very, very small publishing group, or whether you're indeed one of the world's biggest ones, it's irrelevant. I have no problem. One thing I was going to offer, and this may well be the opportunity, is anybody can contact me through the social media of LinkedIn or anything. I certainly don't mind any of my contact details being shared with anybody on the seminar today. And if they wish to come and see what we're doing here, or indeed embrace and have a discussion on some of the aspects, certainly, the supplier Load Hog, I've made mention to them. They're a Sheffield-based company. They're a fantastic growing company that are very quick to react to any suggestions or initiatives that we might have to improve and reduce plastic. I don't mind sharing any of the contacts. I think it is coming together, as Stephen said, as an industry to make serious inroads in arguably what we need to do, because otherwise future generations are going to look back and I think somewhat blame us for not taking a more robust step.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. They'll ask us why we didn't do anything.
Absolutely.
Well, that is very generous, Neil. Thank you for offering to share your information in that way. We'll follow up on that after this session. And Kate, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that question?
No, not specifically. I think these guys have really covered it. It is just that idea of everyone really coming together on this issue now. It seems so important.
Yes, definitely. Okay. We have got a few more questions, but I'm conscious of the time, just fractionally over. So I would like to thank all three of our speakers, Stephen, Neil and Kate, for their presentations with regards to distributing and selling the books and the initiatives that their respective organisations are taking. I would like to now move into our next section. Oh, before we do that, just a quick reminder there, in case you needed it, of where more information is, that we are recording, to keep yourselves muted, etc., etc. That's just if you're new to the call. Okay, so I think they've all arrived. We are now having a panel discussion, so we're going to shift our focus a little bit and look towards the future. So we've heard some inspirational presentations today about initiatives that are already happening or things that are on the horizon, but I think I'd like this session now to look a bit further ahead. So I'd like to invite Victoria Bostock from Leo Paper Products, Merrill Halls from the Books Association, and Brian O'Leary from BISG to come up to the virtual stage. While they're doing that, if everyone else can make sure that they are on mute, please, that would be really helpful. I can hear a little bit of background noise. What I'm going to suggest is that we start with all the panelists unmuted. However, I can still hear background noise, so it may be that we have to mute and unmute as we go along. So please bear with us. So quite a timely question then, given what we've just been talking about. So can I just check, actually, before I ask the question, that we do have all three panelists on the call. So Meryl, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hi. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Great. And Vicky, are you there?
Yes, good morning.
Great, thank you. Good morning. So first question, given what we've just been hearing, there's some great initiatives going on, and the industry is doing wonderful things with regards to the environment and improving how clean they are, carbon impact, environmental impact, etc. But in terms of communicating that and shouting about that and sharing our successes, how do we go about measuring it? Do we need to measure it in a meaningful, organised way, and how can we confine our efforts? So that question is to everybody, but I'm going to start with Brian, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Karina, as you know, I'm a big fan actually of creating a baseline, and I think a lot of the conversation that you've fostered today is in that category of where are we right now. The thing that I think is interesting is that, and it's natural, people have been taking these initiatives on within departments, within companies, sometimes between companies, but as Stephen said, it's got to be done in a way that is positive for the supply chain. The thing that I think is important to measure are the trade-offs as well. A good effort to reduce plastic in one area could have unintended consequences in others. It's not an argument against the plastic reduction initiatives, but to understand exactly what those trade-offs are. The data sustainability piece that Stephen mentioned as well is really interesting. So I think it is important to establish some sort of baseline and then adapt and report on it on a periodic basis.
Thank you. And Meryl or Vicky, if you want to.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think it's really important that we have baseline measures, but I do worry. I think we also have to be, we live in the real world, and I think we shouldn't hamper ourselves acting by waiting for that to be ready. I mean, I think there are lots of steps that we can all take as businesses and individuals already, and I think we can measure the success of those ad hoc as we go along. So I think that's the only word of caution I would say. I mean, clearly we do need, as an industry, we need to be able to measure what we're doing, and we need to be able to be making impacts that are meaningful and not just messing around on the edges. But I think we should also feel bold enough to just jump in and start doing things in our own businesses and in our own communities, and then those things, they all accrue, right, and they become a movement and they become a change. And so I think that there's a balance to be struck.
Yeah. We don't want to wait a year to do something that we know we can do while we work out how to measure it. Yeah, I agree. And Victoria, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, kind of similar to what the UK printers are doing. Obviously, a lot of the stuff in manufacturing is measurable, so we can feed in a lot of information to publishers, but it's really figuring out what information you need from us to supply, and in what format you need that information to take. So, for example, a lot of our customers are already using FSC or sustainably sourced papers, and at the end of the year we can tell them exactly how much of that they've used, but it's how you then translate that into something that you could put into a sustainability report.
Yes, that is easily digestible and relevant to other stakeholders in the industry. Yeah, I think there's some thought needed there. I agree. Yeah, I think that the how, I think we agree we do, with a balance of not preventing action, but that the how probably needs a bit more thought, because I imagine that there's a wealth of measures and well, we've just seen today, there's a wealth of information and initiatives and fantastic actions that are already happening. So it's, how do we capture all that, and to what end? So
I do agree that with Meryl's observation that we should not let the best be the enemy of the good, that making progress in multiple areas is important. but organizations like BIC and BISG in the United States and others can be really helpful, for example, in creating clarity around what our objectives might be. You know, if you think about the presentation, one of the presentations that preceded this was talking about the carbon footprint of a book being somewhere between 2.7 and 4 kilograms of carbon dioxide. First, that's a fairly wide range, so it would be nice to narrow that. But also, some of the things that we've talked about today are very important from a business sustainability or an environmental perspective, but may not necessarily contribute to reducing carbon footprint. And so both identifying what helps in one area, but maybe not in another, is a good thing to start doing as well.
Yeah, and I think there are places in the industry where it's easier to measure than others, you know, so I think where it's ad hoc, people should just get, I mean, I think I would tend to say at the book selling end of things where you're dealing with consumers and you're dealing with members of the public, and you can make quick changes if you're running a small business that, you know, you own it, and you can make those decisions. It's a very different matter from trying to shift behaviours inside a huge multinational. So I think, you know, people have to be brave enough to and confident enough to make the difference in their own context, really. So I think we're all just agreeing with each other, and, you know, just do what you can, and where the trade bodies can help. I think you're absolutely right, Brian, about BIC and BISG doing that job, stepping into that space and keeping us all holding each other to account, I think is really important.
And it's really just keeping the conversation going and being as open and clear with each other and transparent as possible. As the previous speakers were saying about sharing information, you know, a lot of the initiatives that have been talked about today are things that we're doing within our company, but it's how you then get that information out there so that people realise the difference between using soy inks versus vegetable inks versus biodegradable lamination. So it's, you know, maybe promoting sustainability policies online, perhaps across the industry, so people can see that and have access. The consumers can see it and have access to it in a more manageable fashion.
Yes, we'll touch on the consumer in a little bit later on, but yes, that's all information that the ethical consumer or the green consumer wants to know, and that certainly from my own experience isn't easily available. So moving on then for the next question, which is for Meryl. So we were talking about how and joined up writing and everything else just now, and sharing information. So could you talk for a little bit about the Booksellers Association's efforts in the UK, a bit about your Green Manifesto and next steps, next plans?
Sure. So the way this came about is that we had a bit of a restructure at the beginning. We had a new personnel, so I came into my new job as MD at the same time as Nick Bottomley, who runs a fabulous shop in Bath called Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights, became the president of the BA, and we decided to set about identifying some progressive policy agenda items that we wanted to focus on. And it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that environmentalism, sustainability was going to be one of those pillars of our policy activity. And that was partly driven by a knowledge that it was the right thing to do. I mean, I think we all knew in the industry that it had been something we had focused in on before. I mean, there'd been a number of things probably 8 to 10 years ago where, you know, the green agenda first became more commonplace, I suppose. And then the recession hit and everybody sort of retrenched somewhat. But those issues clearly didn't go away. So Nick particularly was saying that he felt pressure from his own customers to behave properly in this regard. So I think he was saying there was a sort of consumer pressure to do the right thing, and that would often be around, you know, the single-use plastics in bookstores and so on. But there was also a sort of moral element to it. I think, you know, retailers are right at the sharp end. They do spend all of their time with members of the public, and they are hearing what consumers really think. So we wanted to step into that. What we did was to create a green bookselling task force because we decided that we would try and, you know, address some of the issues in bookselling initially before we started talking to the supply chain. So we convened a coalition of the willing, I guess, of booksellers who are interested in this area, and we created a green bookselling manifesto. So that is partly aspirational, it's partly political, it's partly practical, and partly inspirational, we hope. And we focused in on things that booksellers could do in their own businesses. And again, as I said, you know, if for the independent sector particularly, they can often make quite quick and quite impactful decisions on their own businesses. So changing suppliers, using local suppliers where possible. A lot of booksellers are already very embedded in their localism campaigns in their own communities. Being thoughtful about how you source your products and services, and working also with partners across the industry. So we had a really good response to it. We published it last summer. We had a really good response to it in the UK from our publishing partners, and I think people were happy that we'd stepped into that space and were, you know, calling for changes in behaviour and action. Publishers were very, very responsive to that. Booksellers very happy to see us doing that also, and internationally as well. We've got good relationships with other booksellers associations, and they pitched in to support what we were doing. So that was all very heartening. The next step was then to start talking in a bit more detail about what those actions might be with our suppliers and publisher partners. And the intention is to carry on what you are doing here with this BIC seminar, which is to gather together and have a trade conversation about how we can identify what we need to do, how we can measure it, get an action plan. Conscious as we are that booksellers are at the very, you know, we're at one end of the supply chain, and we've got to, there are lots and lots and lots of sustainability issues further upstream from us. So we can't affect all of them, but we could certainly help to start those conversations. So it's been very productive and gratifying, really, and we want to just keep the momentum up, keep the conversations going. And some of the stuff that we're talking about is very practical. It's about, you know, using good light bulbs and using recycled toilet paper, and, you know, I mean, these small things can make a big difference. So that, I think, in a nutshell, that's a lot how we got to where we are now. Okay,
great, thank you. And so yes, and then just to add there as well that Meryl, you're attending a lot of, where you're coming to the BIC Physical Supply Chain Committee meetings, and etc. And there's that engagement there as well, which is fantastic. So I just moving from the UK to our friends across the pond. Then, Brian, did you want to talk a bit about the efforts in the US? Where's the book industry at the moment? Where is the US more generally with regards to the environment?
Thanks. I particularly like Melrose phrase, a coalition of the willing. That's a pretty interesting way to think about it.
Yes.
So maybe I'll take the second question first. The U.S. more generally, you know, we're the second largest carbon footprint in the world as a country, and of course we're the one that's not part of the Paris Accords at this point. So I think that quite a bit is happening in non-governmental channels, but at a national level, and in some cases at a state second-order political level. There's relatively little of that overlap, in particular that Joe Shaw was talking about between government, businesses, and consumer demand. But I do think businesses are moving, and that's where the book industry, if not leading the charge in the U.S., has been trying to do good work. Macmillan, in particular, led by John Sargent here in the U.S., has been active for more than a decade. All of the big five publishers have environmental initiatives of some sort, but there is not really the industry level initiative along the lines of book chain that is in place in the UK There should be, and I think one of the reasons we wanted to join this and are planning a webinar that will take place just by coincidence next week, is to kickstart the conversation about what the supply chain response should be, because I think there's quite a bit to be done. The logo that shows up on the right there, the Book Industry Environmental Council, also goes back about a decade and a half. But it's an interesting example of a challenge, I think, that we as an industry, maybe not just the US, but I'll speak of it from a US perspective, that we face, in that there's arguments about what's important and what to change. And so I very much favor the notion that let's look at ideas, not with the idea that there is one answer, but rather maybe there's an answer that works for a particular part of the industry or for a particular supplier or publisher. And then share best practices among us. That's what BIC and I think BISG are particularly good at. But the BIEC kind of has been sometimes considered a spokesperson for a paper side of the argument. That's a hard thing for any organization to refute. So what we would like to do is take the approach that is evident in the UK of sharing information and trying to be more effective in making progress against environmental goals.
Yes, and I should add as well that we, you know, that what we're learning in the UK, we can share with you guys across the pond as well. I think that's really important, especially as we're living in a global economy as well. So you know, and the book industry is very much a global affair.
It is. I was going to say it is, and it's important enough that you got me up before the sun rose.
People that were up early, yes. Thank you. I do appreciate it. Yeah, and also, you know, BIC and BISG have really good connections and relationships. So I think there's a lot that both sides can help with.
Totally agree.
So looking ahead then, you know, what can we do? What can we do in? We've talked about today what we're doing now. So I'm going to direct this question to Victoria first off. So what are the 3 changes you'd like to see happen across the industry, let's say, or one change in the next 6 months, and then within the next 5 years, or even longer term? Where do you think the greatest opportunities are with the greatest impact?
So definitely removing plastics from the supply chain. I mean, for our company, we want to be zero plastic by the end of this year. And we're certainly working, as some of the UK CPI books are doing, to find ways to remove plastic lamination from book covers. So I think we're on a good trajectory to do that, and then increase the use of certified papers. That's something that we're certainly seeing from our side as well. So I think that would be a really good area to focus on, and just general discussions and education within the market to make sure that everybody is having the same conversations, and making sure that when it comes to new developments that we're all sort of on the same page with how to implement them, and how to get the products to market.
Okay, and same question to Brian.
I think in the next 6 months, and I'm speaking here for the U.S. Perspective, is to get to an agreement that we need to work. We need to consider this as a supply chain issue. In an example of a challenge, and I don't have, we don't have a position on this. It's really a question of debate. So there's a big focus on recycled paper, or use of recycled fiber in various papers, including book publishing. And there are folks who argue that that's actually more carbon intensive and therefore contributes to global warming. I don't know how to talk about that problem except to put the right people in the room and have a coherent and persistent conversation around it. And that's what I'd like to see in the next 6 months, is agreement to kind of identify some areas of agreement and disagreement, and try to either move forward on the areas agreement and resolve the disagreements. And then over the next 5 years, I would like to see us truly clearly understand our carbon footprint and have made, if we're trying to be carbon neutral, in Microsoft's example that was identified earlier, carbon neutral by 2030, which seems hard to imagine. 5 years from now is half that time. So it's, significant progress would need to be made.
Yes, agree. And a bit of I think, and again, we'll talk about it later on when we come to talk about the consumer. But it's knowing what is best, isn't it? It's if you buy a tote bag instead of a plastic bag, it still has a environmental impact because it has a manufacturing process that has an environmental impact. So it's understanding the entire supply chain. Manufacturing process is everything, with regards to every single thing, every single ingredient, every single process that happens from the author writing the book all the way through to the reader reading the book. So it's no small task.
No, it's not, and yet we keep at it. So that's it's nice to be a supply chain organization.
It is. It's a good time to be a supply chain organization. Meryl, same question to you.
Yes, I think next 6 months we would, some of the things we've been calling on publishers to do are just, obviously the book selling community is in receipt of a lot of stuff, which can be hard for booksellers to deal with. So in receipt of a lot of packaging, and then they have to deal with the packaging that comes with whether it's in the boxes or in the materials that they're actually buying, and often not in the books industry so much. So I think one of the things we're lobbying publishers on is to reduce the number of point of sale this sort of unrequested, unsolicited point of sale material, which very often go out to bookshops from marketing departments and they're very often for books that the bookseller isn't necessarily going to even sell. So this stuff is being churned out at great cost, often wrapped in single-use cellophane. These things may sound slightly trivial, but if you multiply them by the number of bookshops in Britain, it's an awful lot of wasted material. So we're putting pressure on publishers to do that and getting a very good positive reception to that. So we'd like to see the number of unsolicited point of sale items going out being reduced. Similarly with proof copies. Proof copies are obviously a really good way to get new titles and new authors out into the industry, and they play a really important part. Again, they're being sent out unsolicited often. Reps are often sort of offloading many copies of certain proofs to booksellers just in order to get rid of them. So we're looking for a bit more of a sort of thoughtful approach to this, and we're not saying don't do it, we're saying be more thoughtful. Get booksellers to opt in to receive these things so that they are going to make best use of them. And there's the whole, we can use digital proofs and digital galleys as well. And I think for booksellers to reduce their single-use plastic use, we've stopped producing plastic carrier bags now. Most booksellers are not doing that. So I think that if we can reduce those, it will accumulate. If we can reduce those what seem like small matters, we can accumulate that into being quite a big win. So those will be the next 6 months. I think longer term we need to see returns reduced. I know we're going to get onto that in the next question. And I think we also, it's another version of the collaboration argument. We're working, for instance, with the British Retail Consortium. So we're obviously part of the book trade, but we're also part of the retail trade. They have got a big piece of work going on about decarbonisation in retail. So we're trying to make sure that we're taking the best of what they're coming up with so that we can share all of that best practice, not reinvent the wheel, and just make sure that we are ultimately telling the story back to consumers and to the media that the book trade is responsible in this regard and that we're doing good things and taking the right steps. So, there's a sort of comms piece, I guess, around that that I think we could step into and make some inroads with.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm going to miss out, unfortunately, the next question. It has been touched on already in earlier presentations, and it is a very important question. But I think, given the time we've got, unfortunately, I'm going to skip that and talk about something that really interests, well, selfishly interests me, and I'm sure is of interest for many businesses, is the rise of the eco-consumer. You know, and is that a new US, is being carbon neutral, is being environmentally friendly, is you know, showing that your processes in manufacturing and your supply chain and everything you do is better for the environment, is that new USP. So just very quickly, a recent online global survey, a whopping 81% of global respondents said they felt strongly that companies should help improve the environment, and 73% of consumers say that they would definitely change their consumption habits to reduce their environmental impact. So that's almost a green light, isn't it, to organisations to sell themselves as a environmental concerned business. So do you think that's a fair observation, that question? I'm going to put that to Brian.
I do. I think that the relative pain that parts of the book industry feel varies at any given time. So Meryl did a really good job of saying essentially that the booksellers are at the front lines of a lot of what happens today. So they're going to feel pressure from consumers more immediately, and it's hard to get it back to ultimately publishers and authors. We can be helpful in that regard. But I think that the publishers also face a bit of a challenge in that significant efforts on the part of a particular publisher to improve their environmental footprint or their sustainability might be lost upon the public, because there's not necessarily the recognition, though booksellers can help in this regard, that this book is published by a particular house. So the branding is tougher there. So doing the right thing may not pay off in consumer terms for a publisher. So we have to make an argument that really helps for the industry. So people view book publishing as progressive and effective in addressing sustainability concerns.
Yes, I think there's a big piece there about the message that the industry shares publicly, because there are concerns out there about, you know, the use of paper, etc. And I think it's just, if we can shout louder as an industry about all the good stuff we're doing. Meryl, as you know, representing the booksellers, what's your view on that?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for. I mean, I think booksellers do this naturally. They tend to be inclined this way, I would say. I mean, you can't generalize too much, but and I think they would very often be involved in their, as I said before, in their localism campaigns in their own communities. And I think very often they'll be part of those conversations in their communities. And I think one of the things, going back to what Brian just said, there's a sense in which there is a positive story to be told, and I think there are some incredibly positive and morally beneficial stories and eco-beneficial stories that booksellers could be telling their customers about the way that the books are published. So I think we're all a bit frightened that there's a negative news story that will get out around returns or whatever. But I think there are some fantastic things. For instance, we in Kindersley spent an enormous amount of effort in ethically sourcing their books and their paper and making sure that the factories that they use in the Far East are fit for purpose. And when we had a bookseller day at UK last year, you know, the booksellers didn't know anything about this. They didn't know that story existed, and they were so excited because they thought, well, that becomes another way to have an engaging conversation with a customer in a bookshop. So I think publishers can help booksellers to make that point to consumers, and I think world that we're living in, this is only going to get more acute. And I think there's this, I was at a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about this make, do and mend culture that's springing up particularly amongst younger people, you know, that we can't be wasting stuff anymore. And there are ways that booksellers can get involved in that sort of culture as well. Sharing reading copies for book groups and so on and so forth. So as long as we can balance it up with the commercial realities of actually running a bookshop and making a living. But I do think if we just improve the flow of conversation and information up and down the supply chain, we can share the positive stuff much more effectively than now.
Yeah, and Victoria, sorry, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I agree, really. I mean, I think we have a very positive message. Going back to the comment from Kate at Waterstones, you know, we're producing books, and a lot of them can be sustainably tracked. There's clear chain of custody throughout the supply chain, and I think if we can shout about that a little bit more and about the power of the products that are being produced, it actually has a very positive message, and I think the whole of the supply chain is really on board with becoming more sustainable. So I think it's just a case of getting that message out there as an industry and saying it's a very valuable product that's going out there, and it's something that in the long run is a fairly sustainable. It's not a single-use item. Certainly not for me.
I like it. I like
Definitely
it.
not a single-use
Books,
item.
they're not a single-use item. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well,
that's true.
On that wonderful quote there, I think we unfortunately need to end this panel discussion because we could go on and on, which would be great, but I'm conscious of people's time, and also we have Nick Poole waiting in the wings to wrap up for us. So thank you so much to the three of you, to Meryl, to Brian, and to Victoria for your contribution today, and for agreeing to take part on the webinar rather than a face-to-face. So thank you very much. I am now going to hand over to Nick Poole, if he's waiting in the wings, which I think I saw him earlier, to talk about next steps, wrap up, and a call to action. So I'm sorry we're running a bit over, Nick, but over to you.
No, that's quite all right, Karina. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Lovely. So thank you. I am Nick Poole. I'm chair of BIC's executive board. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this morning's, I hope you'll agree, really successful event. So Karina gave me the almost impossible task of summarizing the whole morning, which I won't try and do, particularly not in the next 3 minutes, but partly just to say a huge thank you to the speakers who have put so much thought into today's topic. Thank you particularly as well to Karina and Elena Marie at BIC for the very rapid about face to turn this from a physical to a digital event, and also just again to reiterate a huge thank you to HP and Nielsen Book for supporting this. I think just to share a couple of sort of takeaways from this morning. I think this has been a really inspiring discussion. Brian spoke towards the end there about baseline for the dialogue. I hope today has really helped to set that dialogue. What's really that baseline? What's really struck me, I guess, is that this really isn't any longer about a should we or shouldn't we address this agenda. The commitment is there, the consumers are there. It's now about how we methodically go through every part of that book supply chain to understand first and then to reduce our environmental impact. So some really interesting insights from Joe at Nielsen Book. Sustainability is here to stay. The environmental consumer is here to stay, even if they aren't always putting it into practice when they get back home. That point you made about 81% of consumers saying that eco initiatives are extremely important in their brand choices. Hearing from Lisa at CPI, Fiona at Orion, thinking about green energy, about how we can get to that aspiration of sending nothing at all into landfill, reducing the overall carbon footprint of the industry, but in a really authentic and I think one of the things I've really enjoyed about hearing this morning, really open way about how the whole industry can become part of a circular economy that is, I think, increasingly important to those green consumers. Brilliant stuff from Stephen. I'll just pick out from Pearson, I'll pick out his quote there: the sustainability revolution has the scale of the industrial revolution, but moves at the speed of the information revolution. The opportunity for transformation by greening every aspect of our business is enormous. And I think we've heard a lot of ideas about how we can go about that process. Brilliant from Neil, lots of striking stuff from Neil Springle at Penguin Random House. I loved his palette lids. I thought they were a really great example of innovation. But I think most of all for me from him, it was the image of him running along the beach and seeing the impact personally firsthand of 30 years of operations management and that real need to reduce plastics, and particularly single-use plastics in our industry. I think we all need to be able to go home and be accountable to our kids for what we did to address this agenda. Then a fabulous presentation from Kate at Waterstones, for which many thanks. Really exciting to look again at that considered way that they've looked at every aspect of how they consume, produce, distribute materials, and how they can make better choices. And I love the way that they've included their staff in that decision-making process. The idea that when you have 1,000 people looking for solutions, you find them everywhere, I think is a brilliant concept. Leading us in then finally to the wonderful panel session, and a huge thank you to Meryl, to Brian and to Vicky for their contributions there. So we talked about measurability. How do we find proportionate ways to measure where we're at and monitor improvement? Great to hear more about the BA Green Manifesto. I think that is a really exciting move across the whole of our industry. So we're really looking forward to being part of that discussion. Great to see about parallel discussions in the US. Particularly that fundamental importance about dialogue. Let's share best practices across the whole of the industry. So yeah, I mean, I think there's an awful lot to digest. I was delighted to hear that today's being recorded and will be available on YouTube. But I just wanted to close by mentioning a couple of actions that perhaps you might want to take, having been suitably inspired from today's session. So BIC has its green mailing list, which hopefully Karina might be able to flip the slide up to show where people can get signed up to that green mailing list. It's a really valuable resource, great way to continue the conversation. We've got some green BIC breakfasts coming up later in 2020 to continue this conversation. BIC itself has now included this agenda across all of our strategic committees. So the digital committee, yes, the digital committee, physical, and indeed metadata, and the libraries committee. You'll have heard a little bit, BIC is working with BISG, with my organisation CILIP, the BA, BookNet Canada and others to ensure that we do make this an industry scale, a supply chain scale dialogue. We're at BIC looking at our own Green Manifesto, investigating ways, amongst other things, that we can offset the carbon footprint of the many meetings we hold. And actually, I think today, as a digital replacement for a physical event, has been a tremendous success. But then finally, and perhaps I think for me most excitingly in some ways, is that BIC is shortly going to be announcing the Green Supply Chain Award, which will be presented for the first time at the London Book Fair in 2021. So hoping that you're plugged into BIC's networks and channels. The best place is obviously the green mailing list, but also watch out on the BIC website for more information about that award, which I think will be a key way to recognise this agenda. So I'll draw things to a close there just by reiterating those huge thanks and to everybody that's participated in today. Nobody has risked contracting coronavirus by participating in today's webinar. That in itself is a fantastic achievement. But I'll conclude just by handing back to Karina to bid you all thanks and farewell.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. A marvellous summary of the event there. Yes, so again, to reiterate, our huge thanks to our loyal sponsors and speakers who didn't throw in the towel when London Book Fair was cancelled and stuck with us while we quickly squirreled away and to make this event an online event. Thank you to our attendees as well, for because I know a lot of you would have come to our seminar at London Book Fair, so thank you for having faith in us to deliver a productive and useful session online. This is the first webinar we've ever done, so if you like it, we may consider doing more of them. We'll have a feedback form sent out to all of you later on. Be great if you could fill it in and just let us know your thoughts. As it says there, presentation slides will be made available on our website, and a recording of this session will go onto our YouTube channel, which is a baby channel. I think there's only about 3 videos up there at the moment, so we'll have a bit of a splash when this one goes up. So huge thanks to everybody, speakers, sponsors, and you, the attendees, and look forward to seeing you all in the future, either virtually or face to face. We will follow up after this event with a follow-up email to all of you to let you know where to look for slides for the YouTube channel, other links that perhaps speakers might want to share with you for other useful information as well. So until then, I wish you all well, and have a fantastic rest of the week, and take care and goodbye.